Welcome back to Unfiltered Unspoken Podcast. And we love that smile, so you must have loved your intro, and that's what we
I'm
love.
impressed as a podcast host myself. I'm impressed. Like we haven't even started yet, and I'm already impressed.
We
You might have
love
to
it.
teach me some things.
And I will because I learned from scratch. See to tell you, this was a jump in the box, and I did not know, but I'm here. This is everything learned.
Damn,
Trust me.
that was fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we want to welcome you, Laura, to Unfiltered Unspoken Podcast, where we're going to continue to share life experiences. So it's an honor to have you as a guest. We asked if you could come up within under 2 minutes and just tell us to introduce yourself to the audience, just to let them know a little bit about yourself. And then, as you know, everyone, City Sid is going to kick off that first question.
So I am a multi-generational healer and intuitive. So a lot of what I've learned is multi-generational. So I've had two doctors in my family, nurses. So I learned a lot about holistic health healing, talking to plants. I was called Dr. Doolittle as a child. But I also grew up with domestic violence. And I lost my virginity at 15 to a rapist. And subsequently, when we don't heal those stuff, it perpetuates where I actually technically won't be free until September of this year, after leaving a domestic violence relationship in 2005. Since then, and recognizing all the things that culminated into what has been so-called diagnosed as a complex PTSD, seeing a separation in myself, I started doing a lot of what I call reclamation work and healing. And I started accidentally starting a practice and authored 2 books. I have a podcast, Triggers in Spiritual Medicine, and I'm also a member of the TRAC Coalition. So I also bridge in doing policy and legislative work for victims of domestic violence in the state of Massachusetts.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being here with us, Laura. Now, with all of our guests, we do like to start at the beginning of the timeline. Tell us a little bit about what, growing up was like for you, your home structure. You've already told us, you had something traumatic happen as a teen. Do you also feel like, anything about your upbringing made you susceptible, to what happened to you? Tell us a little bit about that.
So it's quite fascinating because I've lost both of my parents in the last 3 years. And there's something that's very interesting. And I talk a lot about, just in this year alone, the concept of duality, of how we can have two things that may seem opposite be truth. So on one hand, like, I come from a family of multi-generational healers, actually on both sides, mostly on my dad's maternal side and my mother's maternal side. And but at the same time, it was very violent growing up. I had parents that didn't know how to cope with certain things. And when things escalated, I grew up with things like a gasoline tank in the middle of the living room saying that the house was going to be burnt down with all of us in it. And I was like 6, 7 years old. And, that's probably just one of many situations. So I grew up, and here's the other thing with domestic violence. I think we also have to define that not all domestic violence is criminal, okay? And not everybody is a narcissistic personality disorder, so to speak, or is a sociopath. In my case, I ended up transitioning both of my parents when they passed. It was very beautiful. I ended up reclaiming a lot of that. And so it's been very challenging because I have both. I have parents that, yes, I experienced this growing up. My parents should never have been together. They were horrible to each other. And my mother was a victim of repeated trauma. And so she, I think, knew how to fan the flames with my dad that didn't know how to control his anger. And then so that carried on over and into other things, because guess what? We grew up in the 70s 80s where we kept everything in the family. You don't talk about abuse. You don't go see therapists. You don't report it to the police, all those things. And I think it was when my dad left at 15, things even got a little wonky because then I realized my mother, because of her trauma issues, I became the issue for her. So I became the way she unleashed her mental abuse. And even at the age of 16, she came up to my room and said, if you hear a thump downstairs, will you call an ambulance? And there I am at 16 wrestling a 15-inch knife from her when she was trying to slit her wrists. And so, you can look at that multiple ways, but that's also abuse. And so growing up there, I didn't really have a role model of what a healthy relationship looked like, which then ultimately led me to a man I married who actually immigrated here from Trinidad, and really shook up everything. And, growing up, I was conditioned that the truth shall set you free. There are laws to protect victims of domestic violence, only to find out that that was a falsity. And I think it came into the reclamation piece and understanding the duality, understanding, healing those broken parts of myself, that I began to see things in a different light. And I'm not angry at my parents like I used to. I don't hate my parents like I used to. I helped both of my parents in the dying process. At one point in my life, I thought I would say that my mother was going to die a miserable old bitch because it was like she needed to be a victim. She needed to be emotionally poking. I want to use that. I guess it's a form of emotional abuse, but she knew how to poke people to be abusive. And I think it was her, and then understanding where her roots were, what she endured as a child, as the oldest in the family, that I started having a lot more empathy for her. And it wasn't until I was gifted with her having dementia, I actually got my mother back. And so I started working, doing ancestral and generational healing with her. And I had already been doing that with my dad. I was afraid to even talk about this prior to his passing because I didn't want people to look at him or see him differently than who he was in the present day. He can't change and fix the damage he did and the abuse I witnessed as a child. And so, but I remember my first engagement and I was completely traumatized at 21 when I broke off, and I'll never forget, he picked me up at the airport and he said, I know I wasn't there growing up, but I'm doing the best I can to make up for it. And I said to him, Dad, I don't remember you and Mom ever being happy. And it was kind of a fascinating conversation because he didn't realize that there were that many violent situations. He thought he had, for the most part, a happy marriage. And so I guess it goes into those plays of how do we define love? How do we define a relationship that is healthy? And so I think the gift that my abusive ex-husband gave me was forcing me to unpack, to heal, to address some of the ancestral wounds, and to reclaim some of the ancestral healing and reasons why, my ancestors immigrated from other countries, why they left, those persecutions, right? And so it's that duality, because I can't hate him, but at the same, because he took my kids away and violated all kinds of court orders, and I haven't seen my kids since 2011. And so there's a very painful thing that my youngest, who was 4 at the time, has no memory of me. But at the same time, there's the duality. If that didn't happen, I wouldn't have been able to take the bigger piece and heal those bigger pieces. So now it's even if I never see my children again, even if I never meet my grandchildren, I know that the work I'm doing is impacting them and their lives. And I'm seeing it in my clients that are doing ancestral work. I had a client that was doing some ancestral work, and for the first time, their child came up to them, told them that they had an addiction problem, and wanted help going into rehab. And I said, the fact that they actually approached you, the fact that they had the courage to do that without worrying about judgment, and said, I need help and I want to do this, speaks volumes to the work actually you've been doing. So that's kind of like a 53-year bridged version. My mother was brutally beaten in Dayton, Ohio, apparently when I was a baby, where by a home intruder, and almost killed her. My dad's parents were brutally beaten just in Boston, but just outside the skirts of downtown, again by another home intruder, and almost killed his parents in the 1970s. So there's a lot of that kind of violence, right, that never got healed. On top of learning about my great-great-grandfather who immigrated from Russia, that he may have killed somebody on a boat. This is a rumor, at the age of 9 or 10, and stole somebody's identity, So it's like all these things you kind of go, now this makes sense. Now I know a pathway. And I just pray every day that, statistically, there's a very low risk of my kids ever coming back. And that's planned. These abusers have websites and actually like action plans. I've seen them on how to ex-parte the bitch to destroy them and to take kids away. And now they're using the prison system. I have been, I think last year I may have been the only person who testified on a prison reform bill in Massachusetts on this aspect of the use of family court judges using the prison system as the modern day insane asylum to punish and harm victims of domestic violence. And it's worse now than it was when I experienced it 12 years ago, when it was, but it's 11 years ago. But it's scary because they want to build a $500 million women's prison in Massachusetts. And so a lot of the testimonies had a lot of women that testified inside of the prison for criminal. And I understand that's a problem, right? I understand we over-criminalize. But I also know from doing legislation and policy, how can anybody say that and condone that a family court judge can basically lock you up in a prison because they don't like you for an indefinite period of time at their discretion?
What?
This is what's happening.
Wow.
This is like, so to me, I feel like if we're going to help those that are incarcerated because of a criminal conviction, we almost can't it's just from my lens, and I could be completely wrong, on this, but from what I've just witnessed, I'm like, but we're not talking about the reason why we have this is because we think this is okay.
Yeah.
We think this is okay.
Yeah. I want to ask you, because you've said a lot really quick. So I want to tap into some of the things that you have said, because one of the biggest things that we want the audience to see is from the trauma to the healing, all of the work that you're doing. I want to tap back in just to go back a little bit, because there's so many things that you listed that you went through as a child, and we want to build up to where you are now, to showing folks how you overcame those traumas. So I want to jump back to ask, because you said first you want to start off because growing up you woke up and there was a gasoline tank in the middle of your living room. How did that happen?
I was really young. I was maybe 6, maybe 7 years old. And again, it is, you hear the screaming, you hear the yelling, you hear the punches, you hear, the screaming. And, as kids, sometimes we get curious, and sometimes we kind of sneak down the stairs to see what's going on without hopefully not being seen. And, I heard my dad say I saw the gasoline tank in the middle of the living room. And I think he was just pushed to the brink that he just said, like, I'm just going to burn everything down and I'll just burn everybody in it. So like a murder-suicide, and it wasn't the only act. It's just probably the earliest one I remember. Now, here's the duality of that. And I think this is where, like, even when I work with clients on healing trauma, I hear a lot of people when I ask if they have histories of trauma, and usually I can tell they do based on their physical symptoms, and how it shows up physically in them. And so I would ask them, so have you had any histories of trauma? And they go, no. And then before you know it, they're talking about, their one parent that wasn't emotionally available because they were an alcoholic, right? Or this other thing because one child was sick, so all the attention went to the sick child and they were basically put to the side. And people don't realize, like, it could be something as simple as I wasn't invited to Timmy Jane's birthday party and I was the only one in the class excluded, and it created an imprint, right? So of feeling abandoned or not included. And there's a lot of research coming out now on developmental trauma. And it's actually quite fascinating. And I've worked with a couple people who may have been victims of that, not because of like abuse or violence, but one, because we have a culture that says, mothers are supposed to do this. You're supposed to go back to work right away, put your kid in a daycare, let them cry themselves to sleep. Don't give them attention. They need to self-soothe. And what we're finding, what the data and science is finding, we were wrong in telling mothers to do that in the 1950s. We were wrong. And it's coming out of Japan with a lot of the studies. And it's kind of sad, and it's disheartening when you see some of the studies come out watching like a 6-month-old child, and it could be like, hey, we're playing, we're smiling. And then it could be like the child wants something, but you completely ignore them. And they just, like, their whole energy, their whole face just changes. And that doesn't necessarily affect the child. But you go back, you play, you do all that. You turn, maybe you yelled at something, or maybe something happened, and you go, don't do that. And then the kid just breaks down. Now, like, there's an imprint. Now it actually starts after like the third or fourth. I forget what the data, the numbers are. I don't know if it's like the third or fourth time. The actual brain, nervous system, the structures in the brain start to actually change. And so, I kind of question, like, is that why we have a very hyper individualism type country? Like United States is a hyper. I had a conversation with a client today who is struggling extraordinarily hard and doesn't know where to go, doesn't feel like there's anybody that can, she's craving community. She's craving friendship, but nobody's either available. I'm seeing this seems to be, like, even on social media, I'll see peaks of it, like on town pages. My son, I'm trying to get a play date, and, I feel like, he's excluded, they're alone, there's isolation. And I go, well, is it that we're cultivating a culture of hyper individualism and hyper digitalism, where then we don't have time? And when we can break away from the digital stuff and really get back to the humaning in person, I remember hearing stories of, like, before the invention of washing machines harmed women. And the reason why it harmed women was because women used to wash their clothes together outside, and that was their social hour. And they used to do it together. Now it's like, I got to do a load of laundry. I don't have time to come over for dinner. I don't have time for this. I got to do this. I got to do that. Right. And so I always just, one of the things I try to encourage is be curious. Don't be judgmental. Be curious, and just be open to what shows up when a trigger does happen, or what does show up when you feel isolated, or like I hear, I'm very anxious here. Well, that's a label. What the hell does that feel like? What does anxiety feel like?
Absolutely. That's definitely a great concept to think about, and how that all ties together.
It's
Now I
all
do.
tied together.
It definitely is. Now, I do want to jump into kind of the circumstance around, the significant, or the most significant part of your adolescence. So, what was kind of the atmosphere, surrounding being violated sexually? How did that come about? And, what was kind of the fallout from that situation?
I think part of it was I grew up in a upper middle class town, even though, I mean, we lived on hot dogs and whatever else we could afford. My father grew up very poor, and I think his idea of doing right by the family was to buy a house he couldn't afford and, to provide for the family. But I also went 10 years at Catholic school, and I think there was an over sheltering there and a naiveness, of, I think the first time I was sexually actually accosted was 12. And I was riding my bike, not even maybe 100 yards from my house. This happened maybe 200 yards from my house, where this male who was probably about 20, 21, 22, somewhere around there, said, I mean, how many of us have heard, hey, if somebody says, come help me find my puppy, you don't do it, right? But I think because this guy looked young, I thought he was maybe not this old creepy dude that we're kind of preached about. And so I went behind this funeral home in the woods, and he told me to pull my pants down, and I said no. And I never really spoke about that until about 8 years ago for the first time. And I think part of it was I felt like it was my mistake, because I knew if somebody says, help me find my puppy, you shouldn't have done that. So maybe if I just didn't do that, that wouldn't have happened. So I blamed myself. And then he did touch me inappropriately. But again, I blamed myself. So I think it's not like one particular instance. It's a layer of micros, right? We hear a lot of like microaggressions and micro this, micro that. I think it's a layer. So it's like a subtle conditioning, right? And then, so I kind of held that in. And because I grew up in a violent home, I didn't know what a healthy relationship looked like, even though on the other end, like, again, we were healers too. Like, I could give you stories of like how dogs just showed up when my dad was doing rounds at the hospital and just jumped in his car, right? And then on a very busy road, and then he was forced to take the dog home, and the dog had puppies 7 days later. And I could tell you stories of like ducks, pigeons, cats. I mean, I could make a list. Seagulls always showing up in that family of always needing healing, because the irony was they all felt safe, because in our genealogy, we were all gifted healers at one point. Our ancestry is gifted in that way. So here's this duality of both happening simultaneously. So I think when it happened with 15, I was dating this kid, I think because he was like this rough kind of dude, and had his own car. I was 15, I was naive. And he forced himself on me under the guise of duty. Even though I said I wasn't ready, he forced himself on me under the guise of duty. And I had a lot of shame, especially with forced oral, where he would actually hold my head down where I was choking. And I think what it did is I wasn't sure if like it was that love. I think then the conditioning I became hypersexualized, because I thought that if I wanted a guy to like me or to love me, I had to give him sex. And so there's all this conditioning. And because I also grew up in a family the way it was, I never spoke about it. To this day, I never sat down with my parents and said this happened. They never knew. If they knew, it's because they've watched a podcast or they watched something else. But I never sat down, because I had a conversation with my dad probably about 8 years ago. And how I try to frame it is, I think with like, I don't know if it was Bill Cosby or Weinstein, it was one of them that were being charged. I was like, let's put all of them out there, right? Every time there's like some celebrity being accused of sexual assault, every single time my dad goes, she's lying, she's lying, she's lying. I go, that's what I remember. And so I said to him once, I go, God forbid your granddaughter would ever come to you and tell you that she was sexually assaulted. So it was my way of leaning in to see how receptive he was. And he said, why would you say that? Of course I would believe her. I go, well, why should she? When every time she sees you watch the TV, you call women liars. And so for him, I think these moments also became moments of his reflection to understand his own inner misogyny that I saw him battling with. Like he had like both his parents, his mother's like attraction and natural healing and all these gifts, but his dad immigrated from Ukraine and had a very misogynistic, very sexist kind of side to him too. So he had both. And so I saw my dad struggling with both, and I think he even struggled with my ex as much as he tried to be open with him, and so that's kind of what happened. It led down a path, and I was kind of denied my ability to talk about it or to get help for it. And I think it was when I finally said, fuck both of you. I told parents, I was like, fuck both of you. I'm not your messenger between both. I am not your courier. You're not to use me as your tool to go between. Fuck both of you. I think I was like 17. And my dad, I think because also, this is also part of the misogyny too, the other side of it, where he felt he needed to be the provider, and needed to be my protector at the same time, So again, it's the duality of how these things intersect simultaneously. So when I moved to Philadelphia to go to college, and I finally moved down when I was 19, and I originally moved out at 17 because I was done with my mother, of her with the emotional abuse and a lot of she had a lot of self-mutilation type practices. And, technically it's emotional and verbal abuse, but it really was, she needed help for trauma that she endured as a child, trauma that she endured in this life, being, where she almost died in a gun violent situation, home invasion. And, then the subsequent domestic violence. So it's not to say like, violence is both ways. It's not. But we also have to be accountable. Just because what happened to us doesn't give us permission to be abusive to somebody else. And I think that's where we have to be careful. We can still have the problem, but we are totally 100% responsible for our reactions. And it doesn't mean beat yourself up over it, torture yourself, gaslight yourself over the fact that you couldn't control yourself. It means stop, pause, understand that how you're reacting is not healthy, and find somebody who can help you change those patterns and behaviors with you.
I agree. And I want to chime in right there, because you mentioned that you think your dad struggled with your ex-husband. Did your dad know about the abuse with your ex-husband?
No, I hid that. My dad only knew about the abuse when he had to go pick up the children from the police department.
Wow. So coming from a dad.
See, so I thought I was conditioned, and my ex-husband, so like we just passed the coercive control bill in Massachusetts. And I didn't even know that was really his. We used to coin my ex-husband. You know the story with Clark Rockefeller, the guy who pretended to be a Rockefeller wannabe in New York, and then tried to steal money from people, blah, 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 blah. And then turns out he murdered 2 people in California because he tried to steal people's identity. Was my ex-husband. He was I knew how to smell a rat and a con. I was very good at it. But for him, he was the best I ever saw. And even my paralegal in my divorce case said in almost 40 years of legal practice, he was able to convince the judge that my dad's legitimate signature on a paper was forged. That's how good he was.
What?
Yes.
Wow.
So this
Okay.
is
So
like, he is a master. I used to go, when I would go into the police station, they would go, well, let's do this. I go, I don't know what to do. I said, because I'll tell you this. I will tell you he committed a murder or a heist or something serious that goes to federal statutes. And I'll tell you that there's a murder weapon. Here's this, here's that. Here's all the evidence. It's a slam dunk case. He goes to jail for life. I'll put you in the room with him for 15, 20 minutes. He will have you eating out of his hand, believing his story that I set him up.
wow. Wow. So you were dealing with a narcissist.
No, coercive controller. And I always say Donald Trump is a mirror of my ex-husband. The difference between Trump and my ex-husband is that Donald Trump is not as smooth. My ex-husband
Oh
was
wow.
smooth. My ex-husband was smooth like Obama.
Oh wow. Okay, so
Yes.
let me jump into that. Just to bring awareness to the domestic violence piece. So I guess it's going to be a two-part question. So what I want to ask is, with your dad finding out that you went through domestic violence and he actually was an abuser as well, I want the audience to know his reaction when he found out that your husband was abusing you. And
Yeah.
then can you tell us, and
So
then
I think
after that,
like, and I talk to my clients about this too, especially if they're struggling with communication in their relationships. I said, if you're trying to conform a partner to the way you want somebody to be, then that's you controlling them, even intentionally or unintentionally. My dad was horrible at saying, I'm wrong, I'm sorry, I fucked up, like any of that. But he was very good at showing me through his actions that he was sorry. And it's quite funny because I'm in an 8.5-year relationship with a partner who took like almost 2 years to even say I love you, versus the guy I just helped somebody in a restraining order aspect, where in 3 months had 3 different girlfriends without a divorce even being finalized, each one proposing to that woman to try to see who he can hook in. And I think we have to, like, there's all these things, and I go, actions speak louder than words. And my dad was really good at showing me he was sorry. My dad was very good at showing me he was working hard at fixing his mistakes and learning from the harm he did the best he could, considering his generation. He was also part of a generation that, from him, he was bullied as a kid because he had Russian roots. So he was bullied in downtown Boston as an inner city kid, being called commie, and he was beaten apparently. And I didn't learn a lot of this until later on in life, and so, he struggled with that. And yet he has this deep compassion. So he has both sides. Like, I saw that duality in my dad. Like, he was the epitome of that duality. So when it came to my dad, sometimes, like, even in the court, his focus was in the wrong area. And I understood why his focus was there. But that was his trauma response. And he needed to let go and let me focus on what needed to be on this aspect. Because my ex-husband embezzled my dad's entire retirement fund, put my elderly father in bankruptcy, almost homelessness. Okay. And then claimed it was a gift. Yeah. He did the same thing with his kids' educational IRAs too, and then said I stole it. So, but this is like the Clark Rockefeller. So if you understand Clark Rockefeller, that whole case, I said my ex-husband's like, it's like Donald Trump's mannerism, like DARVO, we call DARVO, which is deflect and reverse victim offender. He always wanted to portray himself so much so he actually pulled the race card the 4th time he tried to charge me criminally. In Massachusetts, you can actually file criminal charges against somebody civilly. You don't have to, it doesn't have to come from a DA or a police officer. So I didn't know you can do this. And he went in 4 times, each time being overturned, on charging me with forgery, larceny, uttering a false check on a check that legally belonged to me, on a house that legally belonged to me, out of a bank account that legally belonged to me. And the final time he actually tried to pull the race card. And I said, how dare you? How dare you, with all the people that actually even experience racism, that you're going to do that here to try to
Is your
garner sympathy?
ex-husband Trinidad Black?
He's Trinidadian. His father's East Indian, and his mother is French and Spanish. And the fact that he tried to pull that black card was really, I was shocked, because anybody who knows me, that's not my thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sid has a question.
Yeah.
Really quick. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Now, was there anything that you know specifically that I guess kind of made your ex operate out of a kind of a place of survival or trickery, or do you know what made him that way?
So I don't really know, to be honest with you. I think some of it might be cultural. I was with the man 13 years. I was married 9. It's taken me 20 years to get away from him. And the only thing that I know, he intentionally did not introduce me to anybody in his family. I didn't meet anybody in his family until the night before the wedding for the rehearsal dinner. And I think it was after I left the abusive relationship, because I have 3 daughters that are melanated skin, and trying to understand what was the components here. And the things that jump out at me is the girl he dated before me, the girl he married and impregnated to make himself look good. She was 23 at the time when he was 36 at the time. To say, like, I was trying to destroy his new family. We all could pass for sisters. He had 40-something first cousins. We were the only white women in the entire family. But with Irish or English, reddish or dirty blonde hair. And when we were leaving Philadelphia, there was a family that immigrated from India that could see his features. And they were like, "Oh, where are you from?" Clearly, like, "Where are you from?" Because they could also hear a slight accent as well. His wasn't a very pronounced Caribbean accent, but a very slight one. And he would be like, "Oh, I'm from Maryland. I'm this, I'm that." And I'm like, "No, you're not. You're from Trinidad." Like, and he would actually get angry. And I'm like, "I don't understand why you hide your own culture and your heritage." Like, I never really understood that. Then the next very person that came to this yard sale that we were having while we were moving happened to be from Puerto Rico. And they could see his Spanish features in him. Same thing, like, "Where are you from?" Same thing. So, when I look back now, 2020 hindsight, I think he had an issue with his own identity. I don't know where it came from. I've had plenty of people that I have close to me that are folks of color, and I have one person that I collaborate with that actually is from Trinidad, who runs a domestic violence group here. And I've had conversation with people like that. One of my former students that I helped get a restraining order, I think when she found out that I married a guy from Trinidad, she was more welcome to me helping her get a restraining order when I was teaching at the college. And all I know is every single person that was female, that was Trinidadian or Caribbean, all asked me, what the hell was I thinking? And
oh, wow.
I don't know. All I know is I was a target. I was a target.
I have another question now that we're
Yeah.
on topic. You were with him for 13 years?
Yeah.
Okay. I can answer my question because I was with my ex for like almost a decade, and it was some issues within myself that I ignored. So I just want to hear from you.
Mhm.
Why did it sounds like there were so many red flags? Why did you ignore the red flags and stay in the relationship?
So I think, like, the physical violence actually didn't happen until this 23. You ever see the movie Parent Trap? Remember the movie Parent Trap?
I've never seen it.
Yes.
Okay, so Parent Trap is based on this kind of wealthy guy who's divorced, and I guess it was a really bad divorce. They had twin daughters, And each parent took a twin and then basically made a vow to never see each other again. And then, 18 years later, these twin girls realize that they're actually related at a camp. He happens to be married or engaged to another woman who happens to be a gold digger. Okay. A very young, half his age, sees like all this thing and is giving him everything he wants to try to think. Well, the girl he married was very much that. She was pulled out of very multiple married men's hotel rooms and seeking to be that person. And so the red flags really, and then she started saying I was calling her some names that I'm like, I haven't even talked to you in like months. How am I calling you names? But what she was doing was trying to get him so angry at me that I would actually, that we would divorce and leave me for her, not realizing that it triggered him to be physically violent with me. But that was actually when I realized he was having an affair. I would come home with my kids from the movies and see him snuggled up with her, her on my sofa wearing my pajamas. And then him telling me nothing's going on. Okay, so this is where the gaslighting. He then would say, you're the one with the messed up family and the broken family. You didn't see what you thought you saw. And so like all these kind of manipulative things. So the red flags, yes, the biggest red flag was actually the day of my wedding that I ignored. And I think it was because I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after we got engaged, and my due date was 6 weeks before the wedding. And so when my daughter was born, right before I started seeing red flags, because before I married him, I owned my own property, not big. I had a small little condo, wasn't worth a lot, but I put a vow to myself that I wasn't going to live underneath another man. I wanted to be self-sufficient, all these other things. My ex-husband came to the marriage with nothing. He boasted a lot. He drove a BMW. He claimed he made like $300,000 or $400,000 a year, all a lie. I also found out 10 years later, when I sold my house, a stack of boxes with 6 and 7 slip and falls with lawsuits attached. So that's when I was like, I think the biggest fear was, who was he? Who is he? And what scared me was I shared a bed with a man with 13 years with a stranger. But my accountant saw red flags, I think because he had a cash business. And so he always had ways of like, there was one time, because he used to import specialty food from the Caribbean and delivered to a lot of the small stores in Philadelphia, to a lot of the ethnic stores, the Jamaican stores, all that stuff. So, and one day he came home and he said, I just got my ass beaten by a big Jamaican guy, and put me in fear. And this is the story he fed me. So then I said, we need to help you get out of that. And I hired him into the financial services business that I started, that he now runs, because he stole and somehow was able to manipulate like, this just like Michael Crichton novel, like seriously. And he was able to manipulate the contracts, and the amount of money it was going to take for me to fix it or to sue him over it was not worth it. And I knew I could start and run businesses. I just thought he would leave me alone after the divorce so I can just start another business and start over again. I didn't realize he was going to use family court to continue patterns of abuse and to bankrupt me. My legal bill was over $300,000 just for him violating court orders with no repercussions. So he was even found guilty of violating 90% in the trial, but yet he was allowed to maintain custody. And I was sanctioned $20,000 to pay him as a result. Like, it's like, none of this makes sense. But what I'm saying, if you go research the case, like, it's written in black and white. I can't make this shit up. I can't lie about this shit. It just is. And
so is he still running the business now?
I'm shocked he still has a license because he has multiple complaints against him with the SEC. Yeah. For money laundering, embezzlement, misrepresentation. I mean, the very withdrawal form of my father's entire retirement account, which wasn't much because, my dad had a poverty mindset growing up poor, so he didn't know how to save. So, and I helped him through that, and I was proud to help him through that he was going to at least have something, God forbid, if anything happened. So it was only like maybe it was less than $200,000.
Well, that's still a lot of money.
Yeah.
I mean, to be taken from someone. And you have 3 daughters by him?
I have 3 daughters. So a lot of my
And
reclamation and healing and understanding, like what you were asking about what happened to him, some of it was trying to understand. So if my daughters come back, there were a lot of awful things that I can't say here because because it's what happened to them, and they're now adults, so I have to be careful. But let's just say I was in the process of having them evaluated by a professional because certain things were happening to each of them at the age of 4.
This is from dad?
I can't say if it was him or if it was somebody else. All I know is I was deprived the right to investigate it.
What?
And to see what was happening. And he did everything he could to squash it. And then what I started learning about the Trinidadian culture is my daughter, my oldest, I can't share this, was cutting herself at the age of 7. And the therapist wanted to know what the family mental health history was on his side of the family. And I knew the women in his family, his mother and his sister, one had a nervous breakdown once, the other one had 2 nervous breakdowns. And what I felt disheartening was when I called his mother saying, look, this is what your granddaughter is doing. I need to know the mental health history of this side of the family so we can get her the help. And she just goes, I don't know what you're talking about. We have no mental health issues. It's in your head. I don't know what you're talking about. And it was really frustrating, the denial. But I also learned, again, doing trauma work, it's actually not unusual, whether it's from Trinidad. A lot of immigrant populations have very much a distrust and do a lot of denial when it comes to mental health. There's a lot of denial from at least from my understanding, So it was really hard because I felt like I was not able to help. I wasn't able to do. I did the things that wasn't given to me. I even put my oldest daughter in 4-H dog training camp to be mentored by 18, 19-year-old girls because I know that's therapeutic. Her listening to adults may not be therapeutic, but her listening to an 18-year-old girl who might be slightly older and then having responsibility of training a dog is actually very therapeutic. And I actually saved her for a while, but something strange happened a month before he got custody. And that was when I was in the process of having them evaluated by a professional. As I said, I can't be the one on Jerry Springer's and then my kids saying, why didn't you do anything? Right? And it wasn't to say, I really was hoping, my hope was that I was being overprotective and nothing happened. And, that was my hope. But
yeah, Sid has a question.
Yeah.
Now, what was, I guess, in your opinion, his biggest indiscretion that still either affects you today or, that you're still kind of working to get out of?
I'm not quite sure, like his indiscretion. What do you mean?
Anything that he's done to you, put your family through, any of these situations, trials and tribulations you've been in at the hands of him, is there a particular, I guess, line item that has,
Yes.
affected you the most or still affects you?
Well, actually, it's 2. 1, him testifying in court that he has no intention of ever abiding by court order and that he wants my children to forget the entire maternal side of the family that we even exist. And how a judge can think that that's okay if you just looked at case history. My case started out as a domestic violence case, not a custody case. So if you just looked at case history, you would see that there were issues there with violence with him and abuse. So the fact that he openly testified to that, and that my kids, he then tells my kids, I don't want a relationship with them. I have a choice to be in a relationship with them. I'm just choosing not to. So they think I abandoned them because that's what he's told them. So he is the master Darvo. He has painted himself to be the victim.
Mm-hmm.
He convinced my 4-year-old. He convinced my 4-year-old I wasn't even her mother, that I was just a surrogate.
Wow. So you haven't, there's no contact at all. Do you know where the kids are at? Is there like any way that you could potentially reach out to them and just to
So when I
say,
was reaching out to them, as I was allowed to per court, he filed criminal harassment charges against me and tried to even say that I was stalking him, even though I had court permission, and he refused. I bought my kids a cell phone just so I could have a healthy relationship and keep me and him out of it. And he took that away, told my daughter she lost it. So she's now feels guilty that she lost it when he intentionally took it away and refused to have my kids so that way we could have healthy separate relationships post-divorce. He wanted to have full control. So the only number I was allowed to call was his cell phone number. And then he had control whether or not he answered the phone or not. So when I would call and he wouldn't answer it when I was allowed to answer, I would send them a text message. So that way I had a written documented history. So that way if it went back to court again, that one, my kids would see that I didn't give up. You know, so it wasn't like there was a documented history. I was trying to prove that I didn't give up on my kids. That's when he went and filed criminal charges against me, not once, twice. And it was thrown out because I have a constitutional right and there's nothing barring me from contacting my children. Especially since he said that the only way I can contact my children is through his cell phone. So he said that me sending text messages to my kids, and basically what it was they wouldn't answer on the call that I was allowed to call, which was once a week, 1 hour a week. I would call. He wouldn't answer the phone. So I would send a text message and I would just say, hi, girls, it's mom. I tried calling you. Nobody answered. But I'm just letting you know I miss you and I love you. Please call me when you can. And that's what he said it was harassment. I don't know what he has said to my kids. I know there's a lot of fear. There was one time his current wife, during one of the visitations that he did show up to, his current wife tried to run over my father with the car with the kids in the car in front of the police station.
what?
And my middle daughter went on my father's bed in fetal position the entire visit for 6 hours. And I kept asking her what happened. And I said, honey, do you remember what I promised you many, many years ago? And she said, what? I said, no matter how bad the truth is, I would tell you the truth, no matter how bad it hurts. I said, do you remember me telling you that? And she said, yes. I said, then you can trust me that no matter how much it hurts, I will never lie to you. And that's when she was afraid to say, Daddy told me I can't tell you anything because he and Andy will go to jail, meaning his wife.
Wow. I want to pause because we're at time. We just have a little bit, a few more minutes left. I'm so sorry you're going through this, and I pray that you're able to see your daughters again, or somehow they come to grips. Just reach
They're
out
old
to
enough
you and
now.
just
They're old enough.
yeah.
They're soon to be 21 next month, 21, 20, soon to be 24 and 27.
Yeah, I hope they reach out just to get some clarity and maybe just to hear your side of what you
Yeah.
went through. So we're at almost at time. I just want to ask really quick, can you give the audience advice or suggestions? I still hear a little hurt when it comes with from the kids, and I know how you must feel on the inside. Can you give the audience some advice, maybe not advice, so suggestions how you started your journey to healing and what is helping you through this healing process, especially the moms that their kids have been taken from them. They're not able to see their kids. Through the domestic violence piece of it, just maybe one or two things that would just help your testimony will help someone else.
Yeah. I think, the first thing is we can't control what the courts are going to do. We are working on the bigger problem. There's a lot of us working on the bigger problem. But if you're faced with the kids being removed, or you're being faced with a lot of what I kind of described with the family courts, a part of you has to surrender into, which is difficult because Mama Bear wants to come in and protect our kids. But you can't protect them if they are going to dysregulate you. And then when they dysregulate you, then you're not able to protect them the way you would like. So again, it's this duality, it's the dance. So the big piece, whether it's your faith or I say spirit in general. So whether, you're a Christian, Muslim, Jewish, whatever it is, pagan, go to that because that saved me. And that allowed me to be able to communicate in an effective manner. I was able to write both these books right here, that shared part of my journey, including the incarceration journey and Feisty. But, the big thing is monitor your triggers. And the first step is stop, pause, take a breath. So when you take a breath, you're creating space. And when you create space, it's then now, what's the action step? Does that mean you're dysregulated, you need to go take a breath? Does that mean you're about to go screaming and yelling and get hypervigilant and react in a way that's not going to suit you well? Maybe you need to go and see how you're going to, change, shift that energy. Maybe it's recognizing that there's an underlying trigger that needs to be healed. And maybe you need somebody, whether it's a healer, a therapist, a coach, or somebody that has trauma skills that can help you move that out of the body. I do find that most people that come to me, it's because it shows up in the body and it's causing all this havoc, and we're so disconnected. We're taught as a culture to disconnect from our body instead of reconnecting and learning that our body knows how to heal itself. We just have to find ways to align and trust and have faith. Will I ever see my kids again? I don't know. But if I'm going to sit here, cry, mope, and moan, that's not going to help me or them. So I'm working on passing legislation that, God forbid, if my kids are repeating the pattern, that hopefully there will be bills that will protect them that didn't protect me. That hopefully that maybe sharing the story and sharing the healing, I'm able to, help folks that can't get regulated. So it's understanding when we get into the body, which is hard if you're really in that highly triggered PTSD, highly reactive phase, from the place of crisis. We have to, I always say, you got to stabilize first. Then we work on the healing piece. But understand that there's sometimes something bigger outside the story. And when you heal that bigger piece, all the pieces come together. The things I'm seeing with people doing this work, they are getting reunified, or their kids are somehow showing up and taking initiative to heal some of those wounds on their own. So that's, I always say, stop, pause, take a breath. What's the action step? And that's really kind of universal, regardless of where you're at in family court, healing, or just not knowing where to go because you're in a crisis right now.
Absolutely. Those are wise words to live by. And thank you so much again for joining us this evening. So we do like to leave it off with, because we like to network. We do not like to hinder anybody's success here. So if we can help kind of boost some viewership for you, we would love to. So you do see your banner scrolling across the bottom here. Please let our viewers know how they can reach you, utilize your services. If there's any causes that you want to highlight, anything that you have for sale, the floor is yours.
So probably two things. If you're in Massachusetts, and this could be even maybe check in your state, one of the ways abusers use the courts to abuse is post-separation abuse, which is still part of coercive control, but it's litigation abuse because it's money driven. So if you're low income, it doesn't really affect you as much, but it affects you via foster care, right? So this is where they put lots of times the lower income families, they have to deal with foster care. If they're middle to upper middle class, you have issues with legal trafficking by way of family courts to reunification camps, which are basically concentration camps for children to be locked away. It's like it's a whole other ballgame, but it's those. So, and I just kind of got off track there, but back to, how you can work with me. So that's all these different things, but we have one program. We are doing a pilgrimage to Ireland. And the premise for that is unpacking colonizer mindset and reclaiming and religious indoctrination and persecution. Many people don't realize that the persecution in Ireland was still going on until 1994 with the Magdalene laundries, where they were stealing women's babies and selling them for money. Okay. So, and reclaiming those parts of us. That's one. So that's really deep trauma work. The other piece, back to the legislation, is the litigation abuse bill. Look in your state to see if there are any pending litigation abuse bills or post-separation abuse bills, because until that is addressed, we're basically walking into a trap, because it really comes down to these abusers. They don't care if they drain their entire retirement account. They just want to hurt you and control you. So, and connect with, in Massachusetts, if you're in Massachusetts, I'm part of the TRAC Coalition. So look up TRAC Coalition includes Jane Doe. It includes a lot of domestic violence. It includes mass law reform. It includes advocates, lawyers, even I think it's the women's caucus too in Massachusetts. So get involved, share your story, and be part of the process. We can't pass these bills unless the people get involved. That's the one thing I learned. If you want to change politics, you have to get involved. Grassroots, start locally, get involved. Can't say, oh, poor woe was this. Either donate if you don't have the time to these organizations that are doing it, or get involved by time, organizing, helping with all those other aspects. Donate meals, whatever it might be. Sometimes we just need support so we can fight the fight.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being a guest on Unfiltered Unspoken Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I mean, I'm so grateful to you too.
Thank you. We appreciate you. So we just want to go back for the audience, for those that have went through a spouse or a significant other taking their kids, blocking you out of their lives, domestic violence through a relationship, domestic violence as a child, watching your parents hurt each other, parents verbally, mentally, emotionally, or physically abusing you. You've been through physically violated at a young age. So all of the things that you have went through, so many females and even males have been through this. And I hope that your testimony touches someone, especially someone that's struggling, so that they can start the journey to healing.
Well, I firmly believe that in my work, doing the healing work, one-on-one or groups or even testifying, how do I help somebody if I don't walk the walk?
That part.
There are too many charlatans on the internet that do somatic experiencing, and I can just sit there and I'm like, it's so polished. I can tell they're not even talking. They're not walking their talk. And really, my whole premise is I may not have the most polished sites. I may not have the most polished anything, but I do the best to walk my talk. And there's a thing with one of the teachers that I've been studying under, and it's to always maintain the mindset of a student. You're never the expert.
That is positive. That is a very positive statement right there. And I also hope that if your daughters are watching this and they see you, that they reach out to you and know that to hopefully hear your side, your testimony of what you went through, because I know they have to know that there are issues with their dad. So
I pray every day. I mean, I'm a grandmother now. I found out I only got to even see what my youngest looked like about 2 years ago. I didn't even know what she looked like. I was afraid I was going to pass her on the street.
have you tried
And
to see if they're on social media?
so I was able to find. I'm blocked on most.
Well, you need to use
So,
someone else. You need to use someone else's account to try to
well, this is
figure
where
out.
we need collaborators
Yes.
because
So
this is the child. Because I don't have everybody's in my family that that was close to has passed away. So
Oh, okay, well let's chat off note.
sure.
So yeah, so we want to thank you for tuning into Unfiltered Unspoken Podcast, where we're going to continue to bring life experiences. And I'm so thankful for Sid, as I said before, because we've been rocking since the beginning, and we are almost up on 2 years, Sid, in October, and that is not that far away. And we have brought y'all a new episode almost every single time, except when we take a couple days off at the end of the year. But other than that, City Sid and I have been bringing it to y'all, and we're going to continue to bring it to you as promised.
You
So
two
please
are
come like,
amazing, and thank you for bringing this and really having these conversations, because I think victims feel like they don't have a voice, and they don't have a way to be heard and seen.
yeah, and we're going to allow them to have a voice. So please come on YouTube. Please like, share, and subscribe our episodes. Please push our following base up. Supporting us is free. Supporter, like, share, and subscribe is for free. And we want to thank everyone for tuning in. Y'all have a blessed day.